Is this the first time you've watched one of my videos? Okay, let me give you the breakdown. You came here today because you typed in atheist into YouTube and you sorted by new. And you see this guy. And or you saw me in your suggested video feed because my videos are strangely popular. They easily get at least 100 views anytime I put atheist in the title. I am a Christian who has no interest in debating with you about the existence of God. That is very boring. That is very unengaging of a concept to me. But what I'm doing ultimately is better understanding, not only for myself but for my viewers, the concept that atheists ultimately do have a collective culture, and it's often found in the comments section. If we don't feel comfortable with the word culture, we can use the word demographics. So with that being said, I'm going to check out a video that I recently made that is called "Atheists Are More Likely to Commit Suicide Despite Being Free of Religious Dogma." So I think that was really interesting. I didn't know that. I hadn't really thought about it before. So in this video, we're going to explore it even more. So looking at the comment section of that video, I want to focus on a comment from Errol HL, who's quite faithful in watching my videos. And here's what he said, quote, "Come on, man, make a positive claim about atheists. You can do it, like the fact that divorce rates are much lower among atheists, or that atheists make up a tiny portion of the prison population in many countries, including the United States," end quote. I think that's pretty fascinating. I really do. I think it's interesting. I'm learning so much about, is it safer to say, demographics of atheists. Now, I'm going to address this, but first, what I want to point out is this. I think it would be easy for atheists to say, so clearly atheists are better people because atheists, despite being more likely to commit suicide, are less likely to end up in prison. They're less likely to be divorced. And we can look at that and think, oh, well, maybe the atheists are right. Well, ultimately, it's a demographic issue. I did some research on this, and here's what I found. Addressing the concept that divorce rates are much lower among atheists, it is true. But here's what we have to consider. For atheists, in general, atheists are less likely to be married. So there are less atheists that are married, to even look at the poll. Then from there, atheists tend to get married later in life when they're already established in their career. And atheists are less likely to have children. So let's put this in perspective. Let's get as stereotypical as you want. Let's imagine this very young couple, let's say in Mississippi, and they're like 20 years old when they get married. And they don't have anything beyond a high school education. And they both, one of them works at the Dollar General store, the other works a shift at the convenience store. They make very little money, they have very little education, and by default they happen to be of the Christian faith because that's all they've ever known. And then they get married and they start having babies, and then they have 4 or 5 kids. Again, they're not making much money. So we have low income, we have high stress from the amount of kids, and give it to the time they're in their mid-20s or whatever, they're more likely to be divorced because children are actually one of the reasons that people get divorced, because children cause more stress, especially when that couple who's married is younger. You don't have as much emotional intelligence and life experience when you have a child younger in life compared to later in life. So that's just the simple demographics of it. I can totally understand that now. If Christians didn't get married until later in life and didn't have kids and were more financially stable by the time they got married, it would be a lot less stress. So I can understand how that goes. And of course, anytime we're talking about Christians, well, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean someone who sort of by tradition identifies as Christian, and yes, they believe in God, and okay, Jesus, okay, yeah, I'm a Christian, of course, I'm not an atheist, you know. As far as the commitment level of this, we can't know that either. But specifically, demographically, it's a pretty simple understanding for me why atheists are less likely to end up divorced. Let's talk about the other one, less likely to end up in prison. If you're an atheist, you're less likely to end up in prison. I can understand that as well. And I'm about to say something that's very dear to my heart. I hate the fact that this exists, especially in the United States, but it does. Our prison system is broken. If you are a black man, if you are a Hispanic man, your chances of being arrested, convicted for a crime, and ending up in prison are much higher. When you look at the religious background of black Americans, black men, and Hispanic men, overwhelmingly Christian is what you're going to see. So when you look at who is in our prisons, largely it is people who are of minorities because they have an unfair advantage. They're more likely to end up in prison to begin with. It's a tragedy. I hate it. It's a problem. And I think we need to point that out because I think you'll agree with me that in general in the United States, black men are less likely to be atheists. Hispanic men are less likely to be atheists. They're both more likely to identify as Christian. And that is a lot of the people who are in our prisons. Also going back to the idea about how finance plays a role in this. Again, I don't like this. I don't agree with it, but it is a fact that typically people of lower income levels are more likely to end up in prison. Now, I'm emotionally intelligent enough to know that simply because you have a lower income doesn't mean that you're less of a moral person. But it does mean that you're more likely to end up in prison because in the concept of good versus evil and who's causing trouble in quotation marks, people of lower income are more likely to end up breaking laws to get themselves arrested and in prison. Meanwhile, white collar crimes, like come on, the mayor of Flint, Michigan, all that crime that he did, still no one's trying to arrest this guy. People with, these white collar situations, higher income, you can do all kinds of crimes, but ultimately it can be seen as excused by the business that you do. And meanwhile, people of lower income are more likely to end up in prison. So I think we have to consider that too. It's not simply because someone's an atheist that they're less likely to end up in prison or less likely to be divorced. It's all the other demographics that they happen to fall into because of that. So for me, it's that simple. I'm willing to give atheists credit where it's due, and I'm willing to be positive on this. But I think that what we've learned so far is we've really learned more about demographics than anything. Atheists are more likely to commit suicide. Atheists are more likely to be men, and men in general are more likely to commit suicide. Also, atheists are less likely to be divorced, but they're also less likely to be married. They're less likely to have children, and they're more likely to get married, if they do get married, when later in life, when they are more financially stable. And they're less likely to end up in prison because often they are not of minorities. I don't know a lot of atheist black guys. I don't know a lot of atheist Mexican guys or atheist Cuban. I don't know a lot of them. In fact, they are pretty quick to tell you their religious beliefs that are predictably Christian. So I think it's all these other demographics that are not simply because someone is an atheist, but, and again, I keep wanting to use the word culture, but simply by the demographics of it is ultimately what we're seeing. But I think this is a very engaging and fascinating conversation. I have told so many people here, you're wasting everybody's time if you're trying to argue with me about God being real or not. That's very boring. We're never going to be able to prove that God doesn't exist. We're not going to be able to prove that he does exist or doesn't. Either way, in this lifetime, right now in this moment, watching this video, we're not going to be able to do that. That's a very boring conversation. But I think it is an interesting conversation to think, even though atheists as a whole deny that they have a culture, they do. They definitely have demographics. And I think maybe exploring the demographics of atheists is perhaps the most enticing or engaging topic right now. And I'm very interested in it. I think it's very interesting to see all of these accidental things that atheists happen to have in common, like less likely to end up divorced, less likely to be in prison, but unfortunately more likely to commit suicide. I think that's interesting, and I think these are only a few. There's got to be more. So go ahead and teach me. Let's talk more about some other, whether they're positive or negative, let's talk more about these strange things that atheists happen to have in common that mainstream don't. And specifically, I imagine we're really talking about Americans, because atheists in the United States are different than atheists in Finland. Atheists in the United States are not part of mainstream. They're often isolated and even discriminated against, we could even say. So, what are some more interesting, weird little things that atheists tend to have in common that we might not think about because it has nothing to do with faith in general? They just happen to have these things in common, maybe because of demographics. Your comments, your thoughts, your belief, your perspective, your version of reality belongs right here in the comment section.